launched in 1989. Our consulting practice includes fractional HR, interim support, project-based engagement, and I'm happy to announce that we will soon be launching an outsourced HR practice for smaller organizations that really leverages some cool AI technology and tools. That's a combination of our deep expertise in HR with cutting-edge technology, which will enable a really unique value-based offering. Happy to chat with anyone about that if there's interest. And we use organizations' own data in a very secure manner to do that. Our contingent search practice is similarly unique in that we don't earn our search fee for a full year after a placement. We understand how hard it is to justify writing a check for a search fee on someone's very first day of work, and that evaluation of fit in an organization, the really important part, spans that crucial first year. So our fee matches that. And why are we so different? Well, I already gave away the answer. We have always been owned and led by former HR executives, and we just approach the work from a client's perspective. We exist to help organizations achieve their goals through the people in HR organization, and also to help talented professionals such as yourself advance their careers. I'm an example. Merit placed me 27 years ago in my first director of HR role, and somehow I ended up owning the place. So it has been a great journey for me personally. Now for the main event. As the architects and designers of effective human systems that deliver our organization's goals, while at the same time creating places where people can thrive and succeed, how we approach the work in these diverse workplaces is obviously important. It's of paramount importance. And one of the key considerations is, of course, demographics and generations. There is a constant throughout histories of elders, and I'll name myself as that, lamenting the newer generations. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, you can do the research. Me and my friends, when we drink too much wine, all of us will rail against these new generations, these kids. They just don't get it. And yet we were once the kids, and somehow we ended up getting it. So let's approach this topic with that success in mind. We are thrilled to have an expert on millennials and Gen Z specifically with us today, Tess Brigham. I met Tess on a walk around Lafayette Reservoir. We were supposed to be networking with other business leaders, but we didn't meet anybody else because we got so deeply involved in what I thought was a fascinating conversation about generations and the workplace. She dispelled many myths on that walk, and so she brought such a fresh perspective that we immediately reached out and asked her to join us here today. Tess is dubbed the Millennial Therapist by CNBC and is an expert psychotherapist, certified coach, author, and TEDx speaker. She specializes in helping young adults discover their unique path to go into the world and make an impact. Her keynote speeches and workshops include topics such as creating and understanding Generation Z and fulfilling generational gaps in the workplace. She is a regular contributor to CNBC and Forbes, has been featured in Oprah Magazine, the New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the NBC News, the Huffington Post. It's a long list, but it's really culminating by coming here to the HR to the Next Power series. So thank you so much for being with us and sharing your wisdom. Tess, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, great. Can everyone hear me? Hopefully, yes. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. All right, let's get started. So we're here. Embracing Gen Z, harnessing empathy and understanding for meaningful engagement. So what are we going to talk about today, or what am I going to talk about today? So I'm going to briefly go over, in order to understand Gen Z, I want you to first understand each of the generations in the workforce. So I'm going to briefly talk about each of the generations because the multi-generational, this has become a bigger and bigger topic in our world. My guess is a lot of you already know some of the things about each of the generations, but I want to quickly go through it and talk a little bit about what are our core similarities and differences. And then I'm going to get into why Gen Z and what they're experiencing is a bit unique. Yes, absolutely. What Danica said is absolutely right. People from Socrates, Plato have been complaining about young adults. We have been complaining about the young from the beginning of time. We just live in a really different time, a time in which we all have platforms to comment on things. So I'm then going to highlight 3 challenges that I've been seeing with my clients over the years that are impacting the generations in the workforce. And I'm going to give you some case studies of different generations in the workforce and their perceptions of things. And then finally, I'm going to give you some potential solutions, some things that you as an individual leader or manager or your organization can use to navigate all these changes. So before we start, I want to do a quick exercise. So I want you all to grab a piece of paper, pen, whatever you've got handy, and think about, when you hear about the silent generation or someone says something about, oh, I work with this millennial or I work with this baby boomer. What are the first words that come to your mind? And I just want your initial reactions. You can just write it down for yourself. You can pop in a few of your thoughts in the chat. But I want you to just take a moment for yourself and reflect upon what are your automatic assumptions about each of these generations. I'm going to just give you all a minute. I can't see the chat, so I don't know. But we are going to get back to this. All right. So, and then one quick disclaimer before we start. I've been giving a variation of this talk for, it used to be I was mainly talking about millennials, but I've been giving this variation of this talk for many, many years. And the one thing I just want to say about the generations is this, is that, right, none of us are one size fits all. None of us have had the same experiences all the time, that there are many, many people who don't fit at all these categories of what you see. And so these are generalities. These are sort of this whole idea of generations. It was really designed by advertisers in the beginning, but the idea of it is it's sort of this idea of looking at what happened to you, what happened to your parents, and what then happened to you in your adolescence that has shaped your view of the world. And that's sort of the best way for me to think about the generations. So
Hey,
let's,
hey Tess, I'm so
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. If you were sharing a deck, a PowerPoint at one point, we cannot see that anymore.
Oh, you can't see it?
So
We
if you
can see
wanna,
it.
you
I
guys
can
can't.
see it. Jess,
Okay,
I think it
okay.
might be you.
Okay, then it's a me problem. Sorry, guys. Continue.
No worries. So let's start with I'm going to very quickly, the silent generation, and I'm going to be very silent about this because they really make up a very, very tiny part of this. I mean, I want to say around 1% now. My parents are part of this generation. These are, right, they're called the silent generation for a reason. They're hardworking, they're practical, they're loyal, and they were silent. Their parents went through the Depression and World War I. You just keep your mouth shut, keep going, and keep moving forward. And then there's the baby boomers. And baby boomers really sort of started this sort of trend of talking about generations because they were a huge generation. There were 80 million of them here. And they were very influenced and have been influenced by, Vietnam and civil rights and the assassinations of King and Kennedy. And what's interesting about baby boomers is they actually added a full workday a month because they are a very hardworking and success-driven group, that their values are really tied into their professional identity. And so they're very goal-oriented and they're very competitive on the whole. And then you've got my generation, Generation X. And everyone always laughs because we're the forgotten generation every time, because we are a much smaller generation. There's less than 40 million here in the US. So we were the products of combination of baby boomers and the silent generation. But what happened for us was that we were the first generation of latchkey kids, first generation of kids that parents were getting divorced. So what's happened over the years is, right, we were that generation of at 10 o'clock, do you know where your kids are? So it sort of turned us into a generation of don't worry about me, leave me alone, give me the autonomy that I want, give me the balance that I want. But yeah, I'd like the recognition, I want all these things, but just I'm going to keep going, watch me go. And then millennials. So millennials have been talked about a lot in our world. And millennials have always gotten a really bad rap because they were the first generation that came of age when everyone had a platform to talk about them. So it wasn't just what you were talking about with your friends at dinner. It wasn't just people, kind of gossiping over here. People had Twitter and they were going to tweet about these millennials that were entitled and lazy and all of these other things. And I will say that I've worked with tons of millennials and they are not entitled. They are not lazy, but they've been greatly influenced by social media and the internet, and that they don't see information the same way that older adults do. They grew up through the school shootings and the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And while they're not digital natives, technology has been an integral part of their lives and it's really affected them. So they came into the workforce, they're very highly educated, they're ambitious, resilient. But when they came into the workforce, they sort of started to disrupt some things because us Gen Xers, we kind of kept our head down as the other generations have. And they were the first generation that came in and said, hey, we want to work hard, we want to make an impact, but can you tell me why we're doing what we're doing? And can you include me in more information? And they asked a lot of questions and that ruffled a lot of feathers. So then there's Gen Z, and I'm going to go through this quickly because we're going to talk a lot about them today. This generation, they're digital natives, no memory of life before smartphones, before the internet, before TikTok, before Instagram, any of it. And they tend to be a bit more well-behaved and risk averse, but there's a lot of anxiety and depression. I'm going to get into the mental health piece. And the other thing that's really interesting about Gen Z is because we live in this global world, this world where there's so much information passed around, they've been observing and observing even more than millennials did. So they've been observing. They watched their parents go through the 2008 housing crisis and all of that. They watched millennials, get all of this education and unable to pay for it because they couldn't get a job afterwards, and they were also highly affected by the pandemic. So I want to quickly talk about what each generation values. So each generation there are some core things that we all value. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the experiences of our childhood, those core things, they do influence us. They influence how we see the world, how we perceive those in charge, how we perceive ourselves, like the choices that we make. So we are all in our generations influenced by the things that were happening in the world. We are all motivated by money and security and flexibility and growth, right? Because we are human beings. Humans are designed for social, money, security, which is money is security, right? And then finally, we all want to have meaningful careers and we all want to be appreciated. Even if people say they don't need all the praise, people like it. It makes an impact for them. So at the core, what's important for us to understand as I'm pointing out all of these differences is that we are all human beings who want the same things. Now, but when you get into sort of these nitty-gritty various areas of what are the things that we want, it sort of shifts a little bit. Big difference is recognition. This came about when millennials entered the workforce. They came in and they said, wait a second, I have to wait till the end of the year to get praise? What about how am I doing now? So they're the ones that really came in and said, we need more feedback because they had been, right? They grew up with MySpace and Facebook and then Instagram, right? They're very used to posting something, putting something out there and getting instant recognition. So when they got to the workforce, they were shocked that there was no instant recognition. So younger generations want more recognition and more frequent recognition. Technology, of course, right? The digital immigrants versus the digital natives. Younger generations are more up on things and they're more willing to accept new technologies. And then finally, this is one that's this big contention right now, which is definition of success. So baby boomers for a long time, there's baby boomers and the older generations that really truly, and definitely that silent generation, that really truly was about if you want to be successful, you have to work really, really hard, and keep your head down and stay consistent and work and work and work and work. And what's happened over the years is that idea has been, floated around. The millennials took it and called it #hustle and that hustle culture. And what we're seeing with Gen Z is they're really entering the workforce with a very different attitude about work and about their place in it and the role that work should be in their lives. So before I move on specifically to Gen Zers, I want to take a moment and go back and reflect upon those first words that you wrote down in the beginning of this talk, right? So I want you to just all take a moment and look at, okay, now that I've heard about each generation and who they are and what they're like, has anything changed for me? Are there any stereotypes or misconceptions that I've been, automatically assuming about a particular generation that's changed for me? Because at the core, so much of this is about empathy and having empathy for each other. That's step one. And this is an important part of it, is understanding our own internal biases and our own feelings about things for whatever reason. And if you would like to share some of this in the chat, that's great as well. So let's see. Okay. So Gen Z has faced a lot of unique challenges, and I want to take a moment, and unless you're driving, if you could take a moment and close your eyes for a second, I'd like to do a quick visualization. So I want you to take a moment and close your eyes and think about your first day at your first real adult job. Think about how you felt. What did you wear? Where was it? How did you get there? What was your manager like, your coworkers? What was your introduction to work? Those first couple days of your first job. And think about how that experience affected your view of work. Good, bad, not, indifferent. And then I want you to take another moment and go back again to that time. And now imagine that you've just graduated college and you're starting your first job in a global pandemic. There was no praise or congratulations for all the hard work that you did. There were no parties or celebrations. There weren't even any goodbyes with your friends. You are starting this new job, your first big job, in your childhood bedroom. All of your interactions, the training that you've gotten was all remote in these little boxes. You haven't met any of your coworkers, anybody that you work with. So take a moment and think about yourself in that moment, and how would that change your perception of work and how you would feel about work. So this picture that I'm painting is what so many young people experienced during the pandemic. And this generation as a whole has had a lot of unique challenges. And I'm going to highlight 3. The first one is really around the pandemic. And all of us felt isolated. All of us felt lonely during the pandemic, for sure. But report after report after report showed us that the pandemic hit and hurt the youngest generations the most. And this is another report that was done in 2024. 50% of Gen Zers reported feeling lonely and feelings of failure over achieving their life goals. That's how, half of them feel. And a lot of this is that because they've been digital natives, because a big part of their lives has been online, they tend to, when they feel lonely, when they feel isolated, they tend to go to online. They tend to go to social media, seeking those things, seeking that comfort, seeking that connection. The problem is, as we all know, and now the Surgeon General is finally coming out and talking about it, is that the more time you spend on social media, the higher rates of depression and anxiety. And so young people are kind of caught in this strange place, right, where they're seeking connection, but they kind of default to always going online. And because they tend to be really anxious, that kind of going out into the world part feels really overwhelming. And so by the time the average Gen Zer enters the workforce, they've had fewer in-person relationships than any other generation. And part of this is, again, being the online stuff. And the other part of it is the pandemic, and how the pandemic has changed work and how people are introduced to work. The second one is mental health. So the good part of this is Gen Z they're more willing to seek mental health. They're more willing to talk about mental health. They're more willing to tell other people about, their challenges and their mental health challenges. But the American Psychological Association did a report and found that of all the generations, they were the ones that would report that they had the lowest, most poor mental health. And we've seen a huge rise in suicide in the last 20 years, over 60%. And then this other one, which is really important, that isn't talked enough about, I think, is the use of marijuana. So here in California, right, it's legal, it's much more acceptable, but I was shocked to hear how many clients of mine are daily pot smokers. That was not what this was not what I saw when I was their age, in my world. It wasn't like that. And it's because it's more available. It's because it can be delivered to you. But it's also been this big, for a lot of these young people, they have a lot of anxiety. And so they try to deal with their anxiety by going to marijuana. And then it creates this bit of a cycle that makes it really hard for them. And then finally, I don't need to tell any of you about this one, is the cost of living, right? The cost of living, it is insane, just insane. I mean, we're here, if you're here in the Bay Area, you know. I can give you a ton of stats on this, but the most important one to think about is this. Since the 1970s, home prices have gone up by 100%. Wages have only gone up by 67%. So you can see right there how there's this imbalance. Instantly, as you're coming out of the gate, owning a home has become something that's even farther out of reach. College is 17 times more expensive. What is it? We're over $1 trillion. People are over $1 trillion in student debt right now. And one stat that I always like to read, and I'm sure maybe some of you have heard about this one. So currently, today, there is no state, of all the 50 states, there's no state that you can live in where you can work 40 hours a week for minimum wage, and that would allow you to rent a median, like an average 2-bedroom apartment in that city. So that's where we're at, and so people can't even afford the rent, and then on top of that, you can't even build wealth for the future. So what's happening with Gen Z, it's not their fault per se, right? At all. Like, there's certain pieces of this stuff of, the loneliness and the isolation and then the mental health stuff, all of these pieces that they've been happening, but then you put those things together with the cost of living and how hard it is to just move forward in life and to launch. So what's happening right now is a lot of people are thinking that Gen Zers, they're entitled or they're lazy or they don't want to work or they're so delicate. And the thing is, it's not, they want to work. It's not a lack of that. It's just that they want to contribute, but they're kind of entering the workforce feeling like, well, what am I going to, so what's in it for me? I can't afford a home. I can't retire. College is super expensive. So where do I go? What do I do with all of this? So I want to pivot now and talk a little bit about sort of 3 problems that have been coming up in this multi-generational workforce. And I'm going to take some of a few client case studies of my own clients that I've worked with over the years, talk a little bit about them and sort of what was happening for them. So the 3 problems. Problem number 1 is, or issue number 1 is, just exactly what I was just saying. Gen Z is entering the workforce with very little confidence in achieving the American dream. And, on the whole, I think if we really dig into it, the American dream was only really available to white men born between 1920 something and 1960 something, right? If we really get into that. But this idea of this American dream, this idea that we've all been told over and over again, work hard in high school so you can get into a good college, work hard in college so you can get a good job, work hard at your job, and someday you'll retire and you will have health benefits and you will be able to have a home and vacation and travel. And what's happening is there are so many people out there that have done that and they still can't retire, or they can't afford a home, or they can have a home but they can't travel anywhere. And so this is creating a lot of, it's forcing this young generation to very early on rethink their priorities of what they want. So I want to tell you about a client of mine, Madison Z. So Madison, she graduated from college in the spring of 2022. And her college experience was definitely impacted by COVID because she was in the middle of her sophomore year when COVID hit. We all thought it was going to be like a month and then we'd be back to normal, right? And sure enough, it wasn't. She ended up going home and living at home and taking classes at home for over a year plus. And, she lived, her family, she had her elderly grandmother live with them. So she loves her grandmother. She didn't want to get her sick. So she really could not socialize that much. So she spent over a year plus, like in her room by herself, taking classes online. And then, when she got bored or lonely, going to social media and scrolling and looking and seeing how everybody else has a much better life than her. So she was in a bit of a funk, but she went back for her senior year. She had a lot of fun, but it was still awkward, right? Hadn't seen these people in a year. And there was still a lot of COVID shutdowns and all of that kind of stuff. So by the time she graduated, she was only back at school for a short amount of time. So she kind of felt like everything was a whirlwind. And she didn't have the bandwidth to even try to get internships or anything. So she was like, okay, I got to go back home and live with my parents. again. She did not think that that was not part of her original plan, but there she is. And so her experience and where she's at is not unique at all. They have done some research. 25% of Gen Zers don't expect to be able to retire, and only 41% expect to ever own a home. So she's home and she's dealing with not only this piece of being young and not really knowing who she is and what she wants and where she's going with her life. When you're young, right, there's a lot of choices, and that's incredibly overwhelming. And so what's happening is that each time she's searching for jobs, she's realizing, I don't know what I want to do, but even if I got any of these jobs, I don't think I'm going to be able to move out of my parents' house anytime soon. So is this really what I want to do? Do I want to do this for the next, umpteen years if this is what it is? So this generation, they're being supported by their parents much longer. They take a lot longer to launch, and they're entering the workforce very in a different headspace. So problem number 2 is this, is that because of technology and because of the advancements and all of these significant world events that we've had, our generational gap in many ways has widened even more. It's making it increasingly difficult for each generation to be able to relate to and empathize their experiences with the younger generations. And so I want to talk about my client, Allie Y. So Allie Y is a manager, and she's at a mid-sized tech company, and she'd worked at a bunch of different tech companies for about 10 years prior, but she's landed here and she really likes it. And she manages a lot of different people. She manages a lot of Zennials. So if you're curious, this is the cuspers of millennials and Gen Z. And this group, if you want to think about it, they are the ones that graduated college prior to 2020. So when 2020 hit and the pandemic hit and everything else, they were in work, but had only been working 3-4-ish years. So still very young. But then her company started hiring more and more Gen Zers, and she was responsible for managing many of them. And Allie's used to working 10, 12 hours a day. It's not exactly what she thought it would be, but when she entered the workforce, everyone had a laptop. Her boss could get a hold of her at any time. She just kind of got used to working all the time. She'd come home at night and put a couple more hours in. And so she's noticing herself feeling, she started to feel really resentful and a lot of tension and a lot of anxiety when she was dealing with her younger direct reports. See, because Allie had graduated college in 2009. So she, that rocked her world. She had to go back home. She lived there for a few years, working in a coffee shop, trying to find jobs, eventually went back to graduate school. So the problem is she was really struggling to find any empathy for this group, because she had been through so much and she had it rough, and she didn't feel like she got any hand holding, or no one was doing any of these nice things for her when she started in the workforce. And so it was very hard for her to grapple with these feelings. So while on the one hand, she believed in having some kind of work-life balance, she knew she probably worked too much and didn't necessarily want to put that on this younger generation. What she found was that her direct reports were constantly requesting days off, and then they would tell her like 5 minutes before a meeting that they weren't going to be there in person, but they'll dial in. And so what happens for us is this. And there's a name for it. It's called the false consensus bias, or the false consensus effect, which is we tend to refer back to our own experiences and assume that other people have the same mindset. So Allie had a certain mindset and a certain way of being, and she's had all these experiences in the workforce. And so she's assuming that everybody coming in is going to be just like her and have her attitude or see the world the same way she does. And that's what Gen X did with millennials, and baby boomers did with millennials and Gen X, right? This happens over and over again. So she realized that she had been assuming that her direct reports were going to approach the job the same way she did, and that they would have the same sort of level of dedication and commitment and willingness to work all the time. And, so it was frustrating for her. So while Gen Z and millennials are close in age, right, all of these effects, all of these things that have been happening, it's dividing us more and more and more. So finally, issue number 3. Managers, we have a lot of managers who aren't used to having these additional unspoken responsibility for having to help their direct reports navigate the workplace, as well as, dealing with employees' mental health. And I want to tell you about Jennifer X. She's a department manager. So Jennifer has been working for a while, a long time. She graduated in the 90s. She got a job right away. She'd worked at various jobs. She's been at this current company for about 10 years. And, when she started in the 90s, everything was this, at the company she worked for, it was this hierarchy, and so she recalls she had a lot of struggles and hardships. She had sexist bosses and rude coworkers that she just kind of had to tune out, and she just put her head down and she worked. And she remembers when millennials entered the workforce. She and her peers, they'd all get together and laugh about them, right? This laughing at the younger generation, laugh about them. And but at the same time, she also couldn't believe how confident they were. She appreciated their confidence, and she almost felt a little jealous because she wishes she had been this confident and assertive in many ways when she was younger, and she wishes she can go back in time. So over time, as she learned more about them and worked with them, she started to understand them. And that understanding she found made her a better manager. So when Gen Zs came along, she did not anticipate what was happening because listen, she had 2 Gen Z kids at home. She was like, I thought I understood these people. But her newest team members, they have very different priorities. They're all really smart, but she finds herself having to talk about appropriate communication in the workforce. The ability to work hybrid is such a luxury for Jennifer, but she feels like they don't even, her youngest generation doesn't even really realize that is, how special that is. So she learned very quickly and realized very quickly that her Gen Zers, they needed a lot more training and they needed a lot more help navigating just sort of the basics of the workplace. And she knows that they had a lack of exposure to traditional workplace environments, but she definitely didn't think it was going to be this much training and so much of it was going to be put on her to do that. At the same time, she was also feeling really resentful towards many of her young adult direct reports because they were coming to her telling her that they were feeling disconnected, and she would tell them, okay, so you need to come in on the days that I'm there, and there are days that we're in office, so you need to make sure that you show up. And she would take the time and energy to get there and plan something out and work on the training, and then they would tell it, then they wouldn't show up. And so she was starting to feel like, well, why, if you're not going to follow through, why am I doing this? And she started kind of feeling like half the time she was the staff therapist. She loves that young adults were prioritizing their mental health, but she felt ill-equipped to deal with their emotional problems. And at the end of the day, she's like, I have to get my work done. I got to get projects moving along. So I need to get people to do the work. And for Jennifer, she never thought that work was going to be this challenging at this age. She kind of really thought that she would be able to, at this point, settle in and really sort of ride things out. But now she feels like she's stuck back where she was, 15 years ago when millennials entered the workforce. But now she has more responsibility, more people to manage, and she's older and she's exhausted. So these are sort of 3 studies of 3 different generations and sort of how the workplace is affecting them. So now we're going to pivot again. And I want to talk about, I've just shared a lot of information about the various generations, especially about Gen Z and about what's been going on in the workforce. But the big question is, right, how do you retain this generation? How do you engage them? How do you keep them in your company? So I like acronyms, and I want to start with clear mindset. I like acronyms because it's easy for me to remember the letters, and then I can go back to that. And I always tell people when it comes to these acronyms, if you pick one and do one, that's great. Don't try to do them all, but if you pick one, wonderful. So CLEAR is curiosity, leverage, empathy, accommodate, recognition, and respect. So let's start with curiosity. Why I was having everybody do that exercise in the beginning of this presentation is that it's really important for us to be curious about our beliefs and assumptions, curious about our biases, curious about where we get certain ideas from, curious about also ourselves, like that same place of, why am I having such a hard time understanding this person? Or why am I having such a hard time accepting this person? So curiosity, I love curiosity because it's this opportunity for us to take a step back, ask ourselves some questions about why am I reacting this way? And kind of getting ourselves to remember that, listen, everyone has something to offer. I'm not going to understand or like everybody, but I've got to find some sort of middle ground, right? With everybody. Leverage. So this is an important one because what I've seen time and again is a lot of managers and a lot of the older generations get very stuck in this place of, this is how things have been done around here. This is how it is. This is how I like it. Or I hear something like, I had to work really hard. I had to pay a ton of dues. I had a horrible boss that treated me like garbage. So therefore you should too, right? And we get stuck in those places where we feel like it was like that for me, so it should be like this for you. But the way in which we once did it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way we should do it in the future. And while it may feel unfair on a larger scheme, really, as for us to move forward as individuals and as a country, as a people in general, we have to be able to let go of things that just that weren't good, that didn't work, even if you had to experience them. So younger workers, they have a fresh perspective. They really do. And they can work with the more experienced employees that have a lot of the knowledge and experience, but maybe not the technological skills. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So empathy. If you take nothing away from this today, I want you to take away a bit of empathy, some sort of level of understanding of how hard it is to be young, right? The farther we get away from it, the harder it is for us to remember, but how hard it is to be young and unsure of where you are in your life and what you want. But empathy and understanding of how challenging, especially this last 4 to 5 years have been, how challenging the last 10 years have been, and having some empathy and understanding for this generation that has just been pretty isolated and alone and grew up with social media, which, like I said, the Surgeon General just came out and gave a warning about 10 to 15 years later about how it is very harmful for your mental health. So this is a big part of this, is being respectful and finding some sort of common ground with people. Accommodate. So one of the other things that's happening right now is because we have 5 different generations in the workforce, people are at very different times of their lives and they want different things. And so you have to create incentives, and I'll get into that later, incentives and such to help your young employees feel like, okay, this is what, this is where I want to work. People need and want different times. They're not thinking about retirement as much as maybe some of the other generations. And the other part of it too is, because we have so many generations in the workforce, right? No single management tactic is going to be a good fit for everybody. It's important to, understand a bit about who this person is, what their experiences were, what their background is in order to better lead them. And finally, R, recognition and respect. Like I said earlier, we all want recognition. It helps us tremendously. It builds confidence. It makes us feel better about ourselves. It makes us feel more invested in the company that we're in, right? That respect. And I don't think that it just needs to go one way. I don't think this is all about older generations constantly, changing everything for younger people and younger people, not giving them that same respect back. It's respect on both ends. And I think that, what I really try to teach my young adult clients is that level of respect or understanding. When they come to me and say, well, my boss said this, and this is what's going on with them, I give them sort of their boss's mindset, and I help them understand what's going on for them and what maybe is happening and what their frustrations are. And they're able to understand that, and they can give that respect back. So let's talk about some specifics. So the CLEAR acronym is really for, to think about as an individual. As you're bebopping along, if you hit a place where you're a little unsure of how to deal with these various generations, CLEAR is a good place to go back to. These are some ideas of some things that you can integrate and some ways of thinking about working with this generation. So I always say with this young generation, you want to give them autonomy, because they really do want autonomy. You want to give them autonomy with a little bit of hand holding. They need the training, they need the help, but it's really important in general. We all want autonomy. Autonomy gives us confidence, shows us that our boss trusts us, but they really do need a lot more help, and a lot more help than they think they do. And so one thing that I'm always encouraging people is, like, if this is your direct report and you need to have one-on-ones with them weekly, and please don't cancel them. I cannot tell you how many of my young adult clients tell me about bosses that will week after week after week after week just cancel their one-on-ones. And don't forget, when we're young, it's while millennials are a bit bolder and Gen Zers seem a bit bolder, when you're young, you still are intimidated by people, and you still don't know exactly what your place is in this job and what you want and what you need. And so a lot of times it is about the manager laying eyes on that person and getting a sense of, like, what is really going on with you, what needs to change. And you want to help them, right? You want to help them figure out their priorities, and you want to make sure that you're holding them accountable. I don't want people to think, again, I don't want you to think that I'm just giving them a pass. They need to be accountable, but they're not always going to be able to express that to you all the time. So this is also very important, is prioritizing face-to-face interactions. We all know that face-to-face is always better. It's more connection, it's more engagement. We are able to deepen our relationships, everything, it allows for real-time feedback. So you really want to invest in as much face-to-face interactions as you can. And a lot of the training that they need really needs to be face-to-face as well. So a big part of that is getting them in the office with you, or in some kind of one-on-one situation, to be able to work with them. And one of the best ways of doing this is something that maybe some of you know about or don't, called reverse mentoring. So reverse mentoring it came about in the 1990s when GE's then CEO, Jack Welch, he recognized he lacked a lot of technology, information about technology and skills. So and he saw that his younger employees could help him. So he started this reverse mentoring program. And it's more important than ever because of all of these generations that we have in the workforce, and especially now with remote and hybrid, it's important that all voices be heard. So reverse mentoring is essentially, it's just younger people mentoring older people, and older people mentoring younger people, and it being less of a older people only helping younger people, but it becomes a more mutual experience for both people. And it's incredibly helpful for young people because it gives them an opportunity to show their leadership skills. It allows younger employees to interact with the older employees, maybe the older executives or such, that maybe they would never be able to interact with. And that gives them a lot of buy-in and a lot of excitement for the company. And anybody new in your career, to have undivided attention with someone who's like many steps above you, it's a unique and special opportunity that can really improve your younger employees' confidence and excitement and investment in the organization. And then for older generations, it's a chance for them to learn again about the younger people, the younger hires. It helps them understand their organization a lot better. If you've been working in the C-suite for a long time, it is very easy to get disconnected from the rest of the company. So this is an opportunity to hear younger voices, to innovate. And it will also help your senior leaders better understand what they want. If you want to retain and engage, to get a better understanding of what they want. And again, it comes back to the biggest benefit that both sides get is empathy. It's back to that piece of it. Once you've had a chance to sit across from someone and get to know them and hear their story and who they are, empathy is inevitable. And one of the things that comes up a lot with my job, being a therapist especially, is people always say to me, I can't believe you're a therapist. Like, you sit around and listen to people's problems all day. And I try to explain to people, no, I get the greatest gift. because I get to really get to know people. I get to hear, it's not just what I see in the first 5 minutes of someone. I get to really dig in with someone. And when you do that, you realize there is something likable and beneficial and good about each person. So reverse mentoring can really be very helpful for your organization. So the flip side of this, as you're holding your Gen Zers accountable, you and the company need to be accountable, right? Is the company doing what it's saying it's doing? Is it walking the walk, talking the talk? This generation really cares about mission-driven companies. Millennials did too, but it's even more with this generation. Mission-driven. They want to make an impact and they want to do good work and they want their careers to have meaning. And it's not necessarily always about money for them, but they want their company to be aligned. So what is the company doing about DEI? And is it just lip service, or are you actually really doing things? Is there a priority for mental health and wellness? This is another big thing, because I contract with some companies that that provide mental health services in organizations, and I will hear often from my young adult clients that getting the benefit of these sessions was one of the big reasons why they chose that company over a different one. That for them, being able to work with a therapist for 20 sessions, 25 sessions a year free, or with a coach or something, is, worth its weight in gold. Your employees, they don't need to be, I think we're moving away from this idea of like, we're family here, right? It's Olive Garden, but we're moving away from this idea. But, that piece of being true to what you're saying is also really important. So, and finally, do your employees, do they feel taken care of? Like, you have to ask yourself, does this company feel like we take care of people? And if not, then that's something that needs to be looked at and changed. So this is something I alluded to earlier. You want to motivate them with the incentives that they want. So there's a lot of, there are a lot of companies where they really focus on, retirement benefits and huge, healthcare packages. And of course, everybody wants healthcare, but they maybe not, young people don't necessarily want the vast amount of options. They're not thinking about retirement as much. And so it's really important to think about, especially if you have 4, 5 generations in your company, how do you tailor the employee benefits, right? This cohort, they value experiences and personal growth more than money. They value the opportunity to maybe invest time and energy into to a charity or an organization or a mission that they really believe in. So you want to show them, they need to feel like their organization values their individuality and that they're invested in them as people. So you want to think about, what are the ways in which we can tailor these benefits to attract them, to get them to come. And then finally, get to know them. I find them an utterly fascinating group. My son is a Gen Zer, my niece is a Gen Zer, and when I first started working with millennials 12 plus years ago, I found them fascinating too. I found them so different than my generation, and I learned very quickly working with them how incredibly difficult it is to be a young person in the world with technology, with the internet, with social media. This technology, it's helped us and changed things for us in so many ways, in so many positive ways, but there's a lot of negatives too. And when you're young, the presence of, especially the impact of social media, can really do something to, it affects your psyche. I can do a whole other talk about that. So this generation, they're very entrepreneurial. You want to get them excited about what you're doing at the company. And is there ways for them to be able to encourage intrapreneurship? I don't think I'm pronouncing that well, but this is an opportunity where employees act like entrepreneurs within the company. Are there opportunities for them to be able to do that? Is there a way for them to, pitch their ideas or collaborate on projects in, a unique or different way? They want mentoring and they want coaching. This is also a big thing that, I was mentioning Jennifer X about how all of her Gen Zers sort of see her as a surrogate therapist. They also see her as a surrogate coach because they want to talk about career growth. And that was something that millennials really brought into the workforce, is this discussion of, where am I going? What's going to happen? What's the future going to look like? And, even someone who's been in the workforce less than a year, they want to know, where am I going? What am I doing? So you want to give them opportunities, and it doesn't necessarily have to be their managers who are the ones giving them this mentorship and the coaching, but they do want someone to be invested in their long-term future. Because one thing is that, and I would say this too about millennials, these younger generations don't necessarily want to hop around from company to company as much as they do. They do it for various reasons. A big one is when you're young, you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want. And so you need to, like, once you figure out this particular role or this particular company or this particular job isn't working for you, yeah, you need to move to the next company. But but it's not like they go into it or start each job thinking, I'm only going to be here for, a year or 2 years. And so even more Gen Zers, they really want to stay at companies for a longer time. They don't have this great desire to jump off somewhere, but they do need to feel invested. So again, just like with the reverse mentoring, finding ways to pair them with more experienced mentors to make them feel more involved, right? It helps their development. Regular check-ins, progress reviews, help them stay on track, help them stay motivated, all of those other things that we all need in order to get excited and to get motivated for the things that we want. So finally, I'm just going to say some final thoughts, and then we can go to Q&A. Final thoughts for everybody. I can't see all the boxes, so I don't know the ages of everybody out there, but this is the thing. No matter who you are, change is hard. It's hard. It's exciting in some ways, but it's also really hard. And we've had a lot of change in the last 5 years, a lot. And we have gone through a lot. And just from my perspective of being a therapist and working with people all through the pandemic and post-pandemic, is I think we've all got a bit of what I call post-pandemic burnout. Maybe someone else labeled this, but what I'm seeing a lot of is that really we all collectively went through something very traumatic, very difficult. And it, again, affected everyone differently. Everyone had different experiences. And then we just kind of had to bebop along and keep going. We just had to, okay, now we're on to the next thing. And then a new traumatic thing would happen. And then a new traumatic thing would happen. And I think we also really discount social media and the fact that we have a 24-hour news cycle and just the global world. We're seeing things now that are really important that we're seeing, that's impacting our world, that's bringing change, but we're still seeing things that are affecting us, that are affecting our psyches, that are affecting how we feel. And so if you're feeling right now like the dog that doesn't want to leave the park, like, no, I don't want to change. I understand. It's understandable. I feel it too. It's there. And so it's really important for us to first acknowledge, like, this is hard. Work has changed radically in 5 years. And so we're all having to make big changes, and it's hard. The other thing is that Gen Zers, when you really take a step back and look at what it is they're asking for, what they're, people say demanding, but what they're demanding of their employers and from work in general, isn't out of the ballpark. It isn't insane. It's really what they're demanding and wanting is what will, I believe, be healthier for us. We have been working at this insanely rapid pace since technology is supposed to help us make things go faster. But what's been happening since then is we've all been trying to compete with technology, right? I sent you a text. Why aren't you texting me back? We've got 15 different ways for people to reach us: email, text messages, Slack messages, Facebook Messenger, right? We have so much coming at us at once that while some things are easier, there are a lot of things that are harder, and we're all working more than we ever have before. So this generation is coming in saying, hey, something's wrong here, right? Like, I'm supposed to work really, really hard for the next 40, 50 years so that I could maybe retire and then not really have a house. How does all that work? And so I've seen many things in the news. I'll see these articles about, like, this company isn't hiring Gen Zers, and this company hates these young people, and this and this and this and this. And I really want people to take a step back and really ask themselves, like, what is this generation asking for that is as a human being unreasonable or wrong. And I do believe, and I truly, firmly do believe that these changes and the changes that they want to make, that the demands that they're making, the demand of, hey, if I'm going to work extra hours, I want more pay. If you're going to ask me to come in, if I have an appointment, I'm not going to come in early for that meeting because my, work starts at 9 and I'm not going to come in at 8 if you just tell me the night before, right? I'm not, they're asking for things and wanting things that I think, and setting boundaries that I think are really helpful for all of us to take in. It's just a matter of finding that happy medium between their what they want, as well as, yeah, we got to get work done. And I get that. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. Hopefully, all right, 12:30. So questions. I can't see the chat. So should I leave, stop share?
We've got a question here. Jess, do you want to help us out here?
Sure. Want to make sure that we reference some of the thoughts and
yes, please.
kind of ideas that some people have had throughout the conversation as well. One of our participants is pondering that perhaps, and she's seeing a lot of recommendations for onboarding Gen Z and to treat that similar to an intern onboarding process. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of being okay with
yeah,
the difference between those two types of processes?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing too, right? I've worked with enough people that were interns at various times. Interns will often say that, well, let me back up for a second, because what someone can tell me differently, but what I've heard year after year after year from all of my clients is that, especially interns, is that, they started a company, they've got a manager and a bunch of coworkers that are stretched really thin, and there's training, but nothing's really ever formal, and they feel like they're bothering everybody all the time. So when it comes to, I don't know if your company has like a very formal intern program. Most of the people that I've talked to, what they've shared with me is that the training as an intern is very similar to the training as a new employee, which is just kind of like throwing people in and seeing how it goes. I think that works for certain people and certain personalities, but that's a bit of the problem that we're having right now is that Gen Z needs training, and they need training in different things. Like, they don't need a lot of technology training, they need none, but they need a lot of training in office etiquette, how to interact with each other, because they haven't been interacting with others as much. What the expectations are at work. We forget, especially if you've been working for 20, 30 years, you forget there are all of these unwritten rules about work that we, no one tells us, but we just learn over time that they're not aware of as much. So I don't think I'm really answering your question, but I do really empathize with organizations, because in an ideal world, interns and new employees and first-time managers, like anybody who's in some new transition, there would be time and space for them to really transition and onboard in a really healthy way. But it never seems to work that way because everybody's stretched so thin all the time.
Thank you. So another question from earlier was, this person is saying when Gen Zers quit a job, oftentimes they report that the reason for their departure is they didn't get a raise and they didn't get any new responsibility, but they never asked for any of those things. So how do you get ahead of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is the setting those expectations and letting them know early on, that is like what the path forward looks like. Because I think another thing that has really changed the perception for young people, both millennials, and I saw this a lot with my millennial clients, and it's happening more and more with Gen Z, is because of social media, because of the rise of influencers, because of the rise of instant famous people and money, like you can make money online so easily. Like, we're inundated with being told that, just think about money and it'll show up, and so what I saw with my millennial clients is they were very skewed of what success should look like. And, we know if you've been in the workforce for a while, like it takes 10 years to kind of figure out what you want to do. And then another 10 to kind of get to a point where you're actually good at that thing. And, you get hit 30 years and you're like, okay, I think I got this now, right? Young people, they have no awareness of that. So creating that framework for them and really helping them curb their expectations, because if they're living in like a YouTube, Twitch, influencer world, then their view of success and how long it takes to be successful is it's off. So it's managing those things. And I do recognize, and I've heard this from my clients and other stories, is young people just having all these feelings and never sharing any of them. And yeah, things could have been changed much earlier if you had these conversations much earlier.
Great. The next question we have here is, this person has, their team has acquired an entirely new department and they're trying to go through integration. This new department is primarily composed of Gen Z people, and they're trying to form trusted relationships, but these Gen Zers don't seem interested in the traditional team building activities and things that we would normally do to integrate that kind of more softer side of an integration.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice?
That sounds really hard. Can I ask this person, if they're still here, what have they gone back to the Gen Zers and said, hey, we have this disconnect here. What I'm hearing that you want to be more involved and engaged and such, but you're not willing to do these things. So what do you want to do? What would this look like? Is that person still here? I don't know.
Sadia, or a representative from New Age, if you are on, you're more than welcome to unmute and respond if you're still with us. Oh, she's at the bottom. Oh, there she is.
Sorry.
There they
Hi.
are.
Thank
Hi.
you. So actually, the leadership and management want the team more involved, taking time to participate in fun activities. But the workforce, they just want to be more just heads down. And it almost feels like they have a guilt about participating in the events. And to answer your question, no, we have not actually gone back and necessarily asked, the workers, like, why are they unwilling to participate? To me, it seems like they're just seem more focused on the technical side of it and actually getting the work done. They don't want to step away from that, and they don't seem interested in actually building relationships with the newer teams. So I don't know how to, there's almost like a bit of stonewalling going on. So from my perspective, I'm not, I'm kind of in a conundrum as to how to approach that. Should I be direct with them? Should I send a survey?
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I mean to interrupt you. Yeah, I think either of those, or, asking directly, like, hey, this is what I'm noticing. This is what's happening. I also think that, again, what I really love how we're having all these changes in the workforce, as difficult as they are. I think this is really good. And so it's a couple things are happening, right? Which is, these employees, they need to take a break. They need to move away, and they need to start developing these habits now. So it would be good for them to stop. And so I think some of it is a bit of like going to them directly and asking them, and sort of, I always tell people, like, just kind of present the situation. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm hearing. What do you think? And what would you need? And then also maybe giving them some education, psychoeducation around taking breaks. And, we're asking you to do this for various reasons, not like some kind of thing we need to check off a box, but we want to participate and do this because we want to get to know you, but we also want you to move away from your desk. And that's healthy and that's good. And it's teaching them that moving away from their desks is a good thing. A lot of young adults have social anxiety. And when it comes to social anxiety, you want to, in a very traditional cognitive behavioral way, and a lot of times I always tell people, like, you want to kind of have this hierarchy. You want to create like a ladder. And so it may be that if your company is starting with like 2-hour party, woohoo, you know, in the middle of the day, that might be a lot. So are there ways in which people can interact and get to know each other in very small ways? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, right? It's a couple different things. That Gen Zer who's sitting there and working, they want to get their work done. You know, I'm supposed to put my head down and go. But at the same time, I do think that for many of them, getting up and removing themselves from work and socializing feels really overwhelming. It feels really big. Again, it depends on the employee themselves and all of that. So it may be beneficial to get smaller things and start introducing them so that they kind of like, oh, so I'm not walking over to a group of people I don't know. Oh, I'm walking over to 39 strangers and 1 person I know, and then 35 strangers and 5 people I know. Do you know what I mean? To kind of build it up.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Sure.
That was great input.
A couple more questions with the few minutes. I know, Danica, you have a couple of comments, so maybe just 1 or 2 more here. What about the folks, the Gen Zers who are not in the workforce yet? Is there some mentoring or some magic words that we can say to them as they approach this transition?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that and this is what drives me crazy about all these colleges that are charging so much, and they don't provide don't even get me started on that. They don't provide mental health services, and they don't give anybody any true career help. You know, we really don't teach people what they really needed to know ever. Drives me nuts. And so, you know, in an ideal world, universities, colleges and universities or high schools would be teaching people kind of like, what is work? You know, what is this work thing that's happening? Like, what are these unwritten rules and expectations of work? How do you think about work? So if you're if you're a parent of one of these kids, then I would just start sitting down and talking to them about that. Like, what are your expectations for this? How do you foresee these things happening? That your young kid, they might throw a bunch of stuff at you that feels like, oh God, that's so unrealistic and all that kind of stuff, you know, but don't quash their dreams. Just start, okay, interesting. Well, how would that work? And how would you do that? And what would happen if you said that? And where would that go? You know, just helping young people problem solve on their own, empower them to learn about themselves and be able to understand how to make decisions, but also just curbing their expectations of what work is. And, letting them know, like, you might not, raises, you got to figure out how they determine raises, because it might not just be on, you just get a raise every year. It might be based on merit, and it might be based on what you're doing. So how do you talk to your manager about getting more of those projects?
Fantastic. I think that's it for the questions.
Thanks so much, Tess. This has been enlightening.